Today we're going to be talking about classifying two-dimensional figures. The first figures that we are going to look at classifying are triangles. There are three different types of triangles that you can classify using their angles. Just to review, a right angle measures exactly 90 degrees. An obtuse angle is an angle that is greater than 90 degrees, and an acute angle is an angle that is less than 90 degrees. So your first triangle is called a right triangle. It has one right angle. Your second triangle is called an obtuse triangle. It has one obtuse angle. And then the third triangle is an acute triangle, and it has three acute angles. The second thing we're going to talk about is classifying other two-dimensional figures by whether or not they have parallel lines, perpendicular lines, acute angles, right angles, or obtuse angles. As a reminder, parallel lines are lines that run straight across and never touch. So they're going to run straight across like this, and they're never going to touch. A perpendicular angle perpendicular line are two lines that cross and they form a right angle when they cross. So they look like that. An acute angle is an angle that is less than 90 degrees. A obtuse angle is an angle that is greater than 90 degrees. And then a right angle is exactly 90 degrees, and it has a little square in the corner to show you that it's 90 degrees. So the first shape we're going to look at is a square. So the first thing it's asking is, does a square have parallel lines? Well, you can see that I have two lines going across from each other that will never touch. So yes, it has parallel lines. And then it's asking you how many pairs. Well, it has those two, and then it has the ones that go straight down. So there's two pairs of parallel sides. So your answer is yes. And then there's two pairs. The next thing it's asking you is whether there are perpendicular lines. So I'm going to erase this so you can see. Easier to see. So remember, perpendicular lines are two lines that meet and they form a right angle. So if you look here, you've got one here. Those two lines form a right angle. These two form a right angle. These two at the bottom form a right angle. And then these two at the bottom form a right angle. So the answer is yes. And there are four pairs. Your next question is whether there are acute angles. Well, you know that a square is made up of four right angles, so your answer is no. Same thing with obtuse angles. You know a square has four right angles, so your answer to this one is no. And then there would be zero acute angles and zero obtuse angles. And then, like I said, a square is made up of four right angles, so your answer for this one is yes. And then there are four right angles. The next shape we're going to be looking at is a rectangle. The first question asks you is how many sets of parallel sides you have. So you have these two lines that run parallel, and then you also have these two. So the answer is yes, you do have parallel sides, and you have two pair. Same thing with the perpendicular sides, just like a square. A rectangle has four right angles, so you know that it does have perpendicular sides. And it has four pairs of perpendicular sides. Again, just like a square, you know that it has no acute angles because you know a rectangle is made up of four right angles. So your answer is no. And then you would put 0 for the number. Again, obtuse angles, just like a square, it has no obtuse angles, so your answer for this one is no. And then 0. And just like a square again, it has 4 right angles, so your answer for this one is yes. And then 4 right angles. The next shape we're going to look at is a parallelogram. We're going to look in a parallelogram, just like it says, has a couple of sets of parallel lines. You got a set here, and then you have a set going this direction that'll never cross. So you have 2 pairs of parallel sides. So your answer for this one is yes. You do not have any sides that meet at a right angle, so you have no perpendicular sides. So the answer to this one is no. And 0. There's no pairs. Your next question it asks you is if you have any acute angles. The answer is yes. If you look at the way the angles are formed, there's an acute angle here and an acute angle down at the bottom also. So there's 2 acute angles, so your answer is yes, and there's 2 of them. And then the next one is how many obtuse angles? Well, there are 2 pairs of, or there's 2 obtuse angles, the one up here in the corner and then the one down in this corner are 2 obtuse angles, so the answer is yes. And the answer is 2. Well, I have 2 obtuse angles and 2 acute angles, so there is no right angles for this one. Your next shape is a rhombus. It has 2 pairs of parallel sides, so you've got the parallel sides here, and then you have the parallel sides on this side. So you have, yes, I have parallel sides, and then there's 2 pairs. There are no perpendicular sides. There's no sides that meet at a right angle, so your answer here is no with 0. And just like a parallelogram, your acute angles are the angle in the corner down here and the corner up here, so you have 2 acute angles, so your answer is yes. And I have 2 of them. You have 2 obtuse angles. You've got an obtuse angle down here and an obtuse angle up here, so the answer is yes. And then I have 2 of them. And then because I have 2 obtuse angles and 2 acute angles, I cannot have any right angles, so my answer to this is no and 0. The next shape we're going to look at is a right trapezoid. You have so you have 1 set of parallel sides. That is one of the major definitions of a trapezoid, is that it has 1 set of parallel sides. So your answer is yes. And you have 1 pair. Your next question asks you how many sets of perpendicular sides. You have a perpendicular side there and a perpendicular side there, so your answer is yes, and I have 2 of them. Your next question says, do I have any acute angles? You have an acute angle right here, so the answer is yes, and I have 1. The next question asks you how many obtuse angles you have. You have an obtuse angle here in the top corner, so the answer is yes, and I have 1. And then your last question for this one says, how many right angles do I have? You have a right angle in this corner and a right angle in this corner, so I have 2. So my answer is yes, and I have 2 of them. The next shape we're going to look at is just a regular trapezoid. The first question asks you if I have any parallel sides. You have this top side that's parallel and the bottom that are parallel to each other. So a trapezoid always only has one pair of parallel sides, so your answer is yes. And the answer is 1 pair. It asks if you have any perpendicular sides, and there is no sides that form at a right angle, so your answer to this one is no. Next question says, how many acute angles do I have? The answer to this is yes, I have them, and there's one here and one here, so there are 2 of them. The next question asks you how many obtuse angles do I have? I have one in this corner and one in this corner, so the answer is yes. And there are 2 of them. And because I have 2 acute angles and 2 obtuse angles, I have no right angles. So my answer is no and 0. The next shape we're going to look at is a right triangle. A right triangle has no parallel sides, so my answer is no and 0. It has one set of perpendicular lines because it's got a right angle right here. So it's got 2 lines that meet at a right angle, so your answer is yes. And how many pairs is 1? How many acute angles? It has 2 acute angles, just like we talked about at the beginning of this video. Your right triangle is 1 right angle and 2 acute angles. So we have yes and 2. Do we have any obtuse angles? The answer to that is no. We do not have any obtuse angles. Your last question is, do I have any right angles? Just like I showed you earlier, you have one set of perpendicular lines, so you do have a right angle. So the answer to this question is yes. And you have 1 right angle. Your next shape is an acute triangle. You do not have any lines that meet at a right angle, so you do not have any perpendicular line or parallel lines. I'm sorry. You don't have any lines that run straight across without touching each other, so your answer is no and 0. You do not have any lines that form at a right angle, so your answer is no and 0. The next question says, do I have any acute angles? And your answer is yes. I have 3. An acute triangle is made up of 3 acute angles. So my answer is 3. Your next question asks you if you have any obtuse angles. If you have 3 acute angles in your triangle, you cannot have any obtuse angles, so your answer is no with 0. The last question for this shape asks if you have any right angles. Again, if you have 3 acute angles on a triangle, you cannot have any right angles. The answer is no and 0. Your last shape that we're going to talk about today is an obtuse angle. The first question is, do I have any parallel lines? Well, we don't have any lines that run straight across without touching each other, so your answer is no, with 0. You don't have any perpendicular lines because you have no right angles in this shape, so your answer is no, with 0. It asks if you have any acute angles. The answer is yes. You have an acute angle here, an acute angle here, so you have 2. So your answer is yes. And you have 2 acute angles. The next question says, do I have any obtuse angles? Well, it's called an obtuse triangle, so you have 1 obtuse angle, which is right here. So your answer is yes. And you have 1. And then your last question asks if you have any right angles. The answer to that is no, with 0. Okay, your secret word for today is figure. Figure. Figure.